We are speaking this week about God's plans and his purposes for our lives, which began long before we realized that God is even at work in us. Good morning. This is Pastor Ernie Lewis of the Blue Point Church in Sisseton, Illinois, with your thoughts for Thursday. God knows who we are and what our purpose will be in his kingdom early in our life. When he called Jeremiah to be his prophet to the people of Judah, he was leading him to deal with them through a difficult time, a time of captivity in Babylon. So he says in Jeremiah 1:5, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations." Now, this should be a wake-up call to those who support abortion and pro-choice ideas in the U.S. God said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." Apparently, God's work of creation continues today in the womb of an expectant mother. We believe the formation of an unborn child goes far beyond developing 10 fingers and 10 toes. God is already working on our personality, developing us to be used in his kingdom. So he tells Jeremiah here, even in the womb, I knew you. And we know that God can look into our very hearts and our minds, but this verse tells us that God already knows our thoughts and our intentions, even when we're being formed in that womb. He tells Jeremiah here, before you were born, I sanctified you. Now, being sanctified means to be set apart, to be prepared for God's service. This picture of early sanctification reminds us of how important it is that we bring up our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. If he has set them apart to be used in his service, we as parents or even as a church family need to do all that's within our power to train them in seeking after God and making themselves available to God. The sad story of Samson's life reminds us that he sought the things of this world rather than being faithful to his calling by God to remain pure and sanctified by the Lord. Just think how much more he could have done for God and his nation had he stayed out of Delilah's hair parlor. God wants to sanctify his servants before they leave the womb and before they are tainted by the thoughts and desires of this evil world that we're being born into. God also told Jeremiah, I ordained you a prophet to the nations. Now, Jeremiah began early on trying to escape God's plan and purpose for his life. He, first of all, said to him, I'm too young. I cannot speak, for I am but a youth. He wasn't telling God anything that he didn't already know about him. When God begins that formation of our personality in the womb and sanctifies us for his service, we must know that God's purpose and God's plan is so much more than we could ever understand at that time. Instead of making excuses and running from God, we need to accept the fact that God knows more about our lives from the very beginning, and he has formed and sanctified us for his plans. It would seem that the best thing for us to do would be to seek God's will for our life and set out to follow it, knowing that we were formed and set aside for this purpose before we were ever born.